Okay, we are building an Eggtimer Quasar. Eggtimer's newest GPS combined altimeter flight computer with 3 deployment channels. Got the board mounted here. I'll try to keep this in view as best as possible and keep my fat hands out of the way. I have pre-tinned one of each pad so we can start putting down components. I am not necessarily following the order given by the manufacturer, but I think we'll do just fine. So we'll start with this 331 resistor. I heat up the tinned pad, apply the tweezers to the center, and it drops into place with a little click. The new surface mount LEDs are extremely small. Next we have a 10 farad capacitor. And I do have my iron set to 600 degrees. I'm using a Weller WX1. I'm also using a dry cleaning sponge. Dry, it's more like a Scotch-Brite. Keep my tip clean. So I just tack each component on one side. Keeps things going at a good pace. I've got the buzzer tacked down. First time with this style of component. Another 10 farad capacitor. Hold it down, clicks into place. And a 0.1. These are labeled C104, silk screened onto the board, not to be confused with the 104 capacitor. And the 472. Alright, that looks everything on this side. So I'll go back and solder down the other side. Apply some heat, quick solder. Alright, after each component is soldered on both sides, I will go back over the first side with just a quick hit of the solder in the iron. It cleans up the solder joint. Also lets me know that that second side was properly secured. If it wasn't, it would quickly lift off the surface. Looks like everything on this side. Well, for now at least. We're going to flip it over and do some more. Alright, we did mount some standoffs like Chris recommended to keep the GPS antenna from applying too much pressure to it. So we're going to start assembling components on this side. That top pad there's a little difficult to read. Pretty sure it's reading 10 for 10 UF capacitor. So I actually just removed that 10 UF capacitor. I'm actually going to go back to the other side and I'm going to mount the Wi-Fi module before we proceed. I have it taped and pre-tinned most of the holes. I'll come back once I get it tacked down and we'll continue on. Okay, so the RF module, or sorry, the Wi-Fi module is just taped in position with 4 LED LED leads that I've cut off from previous installs, holding everything in alignment. So it'll still move around until I get it positioned just right. Start by tacking these temporarily in place. Hold in position. This is a different method than Chris recommends. He would have you pre-solder all the resistor leads to the chip. This is just the method that I find works well and is a little quicker to assemble. So those are all tacked in place. The board is lifted off the surface slightly. So this is kind of a three-handed kneaded technique, but I will hold with tweezers, cut one off, position it over the pre-tinned next hole, and push that pin through. So now that second pin is in place. Looks like the board is still not soldered completely to the module, but it will be as soon as one of these push enough solder through both holes. Just like that. Heat the pad up, push the lead through, I can actually look under the board, make sure the lead's sticking through enough. If it felt like it was binding while going in. You might find that the other method is easier, pre-assembling all the smaller resistor leads. And you might want to go that route. This has just seemed to be a cleaner install. The other method ends up leaving the Wi-Fi module lifted quite high above the board if you don't have really clean solder joints. And I think it just takes a little bit longer to get everything lined up just right. This method here works pretty well. Alright, all 16 pads are soldered down. Now I will go over and clean up each of them, applying a little heat. Fresh solder cleans up that freshly clipped lead. Alright, the Wi-Fi module is installed, and it will be protected by the standoffs as well. So we'll flip it over and continue. Okay, I'm not going to tape the board down to that metal plate with the standoffs. This is a larger board. Doesn't seem to move around too much for me, as long as I'm able to position the components. If they're ever a little crooked like that, really simply hold it from the side, heat it up, rotate the tweezers a little bit, and we're lined up. I'm going to finish tacking down each side of these resistors and then I'll come back. Alright, so previously I noted that silk screen, not really legible. I can only read the 10. It's supposed to be a 104, so I haven't tacked down both sides. That'll be simple to remove. This resistor over here, not clearly labeled, but it is a 103 as well. This 10 UF capacitor goes here. Right, all the smaller parts are mounted down. Go back by and solder the second half. And by all, I mean the ones that I didn't miss, which I'm now seeing that I've missed a few. But that's alright. These components are large enough. It's pretty easy to see them and get them in place. If I can keep this in the camera shot, that'd be great. With the smaller surface mounts, I don't like to pull all of them out of the package ahead of time. It's very difficult to read those. Alright, we'll mount the small FET. It is very tiny, and you get a spare one. Heat it up, push it down with the tweezers, tap it, and it's seated. Let that cool for a minute. While we do, we can come over and get the back side of our Wi-Fi module. Just to keep the heat down, I'll skip every other one. And when having those close to the board during install, They don't stick through very much. If they did, you could just clip them flush. Focus. Alright, don't forget to come back and do the last fat leg and touch the top. First leg we did. Alright, now we can install the 3 drivers, one for each deployment channel. These do not have a dot like most of these little 8 pins do. Let's see here. But there is a taper on one side, and that's actually on my left. Hold it into position. I'll put my finger on it, tap the lead again, heat it up, and it stays down. You can do each of these one at a time. But doing all 3 at once actually allows the heat to dissipate a little bit. Alright. Verify that they're all lined up. Now these tiny solder joints, I don't necessarily make perfect the first time around, because I'm going to go back through at the end and drag each one and pull the solder nice and clean. Alright, so drag the solder off, clean tip. I'm going to place it on its side, heat the joint and pull away. And any excess solder will pull up onto the iron. It's very quick at this temperature, only on there for half a second. Clean the tip off every few pads, remove the excess solder. And if you happen to get a solder bridge, as you notice there's 3 of them on those top 3 pads, but those are intentional. But if you happen to get a solder bridge on any of these small pins where it's just a big glob, dragging the iron across like I just did will clean that up. Look at this under the magnifying glass. And those all look good. Next, I will install the voltage regulator. Got the large pad pre-tinned. Heat it up. Apply a little weight. And that's down. Alright, while that cools off, go ahead and install the EEPROM and the, what's this new component? An expander. I do not know what an expander does, but I don't know what most of these components do. Again, the expander does not have a dot. It just has a beveled side to it. So you'll have to ensure that it's going on the right direction for pin 1. Make sure those are lined up. Let those cool for a minute. Come back to the voltage regulator. Go back through, make sure you've got all your other parts soldered down. Like I just missed a couple resistors. So if you do them one at a time, like the directions say, you don't make that mistake. It takes a little longer going back and forth from different resistor numbers. It's easy to go over the board though and just do them all at once. So there I've got a solder bridge, but that will clean up. Let's see here. Right there at the top of the EEPROM. Clean iron, quick touch, drag away. Didn't clean my tip, so I made another bridge here, but now they're gone. Do the other side. Looks good. Double check the board, make sure you've got each component checked. Alright, next we're going to do the Hope RF module. Underside is taped. I won't tape it down yet, I'm just going to hold it into position so it's aligned. I've got that first pad tinned, heated up. Gently tacked into place, and they're aligned. Now I'll push my tape down. This tape keeps any excess solder, even really small splatters, from getting onto those tiny components. Let the components cool down for a little bit. A little bit too much solder on there. You can wick some of it away with the iron, but I don't think it's going to hurt anything. All those connections, if I can get it to focus, clean and shiny. Alright, I paused the video and I'm not sure what I missed, where I cut off from, but the Hope RF module is soldered down. Give it a little bit of time between each joint. Just get a little bit more heat than the other components. It's taped down to keep it clean. So now we will flip it back over and do the through the hole components. I'm going to go ahead and leave this tape on here now just to protect that. So I will start with the rectifier right in the middle. Drop it in. Background. This could be taped down. Again, this is the technique I use. Seems to be a little quicker. Just get the first middle lead tacked in. I rest the back side of the component on my heat sink little board underneath, heat it up, move it into place, and I drag the iron up, which pulls off extra solder and leaves it cleanly in place. Then we will install the power FET, which is over here, dropped in place. This could be taped down, but just put in place. A little bit of extra solder, pulling it up, drags the excess away, leaves it nice and straight. Now I'm going to use my flush cuts so that all the joints look nicer afterwards, and cut everything flush without making a huge mess. Those will solder much cleaner. Apply heat, good amount of solder, and it's done. I won't have to come back by and clean it up after it's been cut. Move over to the other component. And bounce back and forth. Let the heat stay down. Now the first center lead will get cleaned up. A little bit of solder and heat. Those look good. There are no sharp edges on them. And always make sure you're avoiding sources of static. I am on an anti-static mat, and sometimes I wear a bracelet, but most often my hand is just resting on the ground pad. Alright, next we have this resistor. What's he calling it? A SIP resistor. I guess it looks like there's 3 resistors in one. It mounts right below the Wi-Fi module, and the square pin closest to my thumb gets the little dot on the resistor. Since this component is short, I will put a little bitty piece of tape on it to hold it into position. Flip it over. I'll solder just one of the leads. Remove the tape. Now to get a cleaner install, I'll actually heat it back up and press it into place all the way. So it's seated another 1/16 of an inch and sits real close to the board. I'll also trim all those leads flush to the board, making sure all of my little flying pieces of metal don't end up on the board where they shouldn't be. Alright. And the 4 holes look like data logger. Nope, that's servo control next to it. Open loggers over on the other side. Next, we've got some headers. Looks like this one here for programming. Goes over the Wi-Fi module. I should have removed the standoff so it would make it easier to just flip it over and hold into place, but I'll use a piece of tape in the meantime. Tacked in place. Whoa. Don't drop it. It's at a little downward angle, so I'm going to hold it with a finger apply a little bit of heat and lift it up. And remove your finger before you burn yourself. Trim those leads flush. Alright, looks good. Okay, off camera I went ahead and just installed the other run and program pins here and here. Now we're going to mount the terminal block, put it into place. It's a tall component, so I can literally just flip it over, rest it on that board. Tack one towards the end. Make sure it's lined up. Apply a little bit of weight, heat it back up. Make sure that terminal block is firm against the board. Get one on the other end. Also make sure that the terminal block openings are facing the outside of the board, unless you really want to fight with wires going through the inside. I guess this board wouldn't be too bad, so I guess that would be your preference. I will trim these leads flush before soldering the rest. Terminal blocks on, and temporarily install the run jumper so I don't lose it. The program jumper will sit halfway installed on one side so I don't lose it. Next, I'm going to install some battery leads. I'll be back. Alright, the battery leads are temporarily installed, just resting there at the weight of the board. Gently tack them in place. These are a 20 gauge silicone wire with the JST connector. I put a little bit of heat shrink on it for strain relief, and I will go back and shrink these ends down. Clean up that joint a little bit. Alright, that's pretty much it for assembly. Next on for testing.